The crack of a gunshot tore through the calm Saturday air like a slap across the face. I dropped my coffee and bolted for the front door, yanking it open so hard it ricocheted off the wall. My heart nearly exploded out of my chest as I sprinted onto the porch. Across the lawn, my daughter Riley stood perfectly still, calm as a lake, while the neighborhood's self-appointed HOA security guard had a loaded pistol aimed directly at her chest. His face was beet red, his hands shaking, and he had no idea he was pointing a weapon at a tactical commander with 15 years of FBI experience. That morning had been picture perfect. Riley had shown up in jeans and a hoodie from Quantico, smiling as she handed me a bag of donuts. We'd laughed, caught up, and she parked her Jeep half a tire over the barely there lines of what used to be the visitor section lines nobody cared about anymore. Except for Frank. Frank was the HOA's security officer, a man whose idea of conflict resolution was yelling about trash bins and citing imaginary rules. He wasn't law enforcement. He wasn't even licensed. But he wore a uniform and carried a gun like he thought he was starring in his own action movie. He tore across the street in that rusted-out golf cart like he was chasing down a fugitive. Riley didn't even get a chance to sip her coffee before he screeched to a halt, barking orders and waving a clipboard like a badge. When she asked him politely where it was written that she couldn't park there, he stammered something about verbal bylaws. Then he demanded ID. Riley just smiled. That's when he snapped. I saw it from the porch. His hand went for the gun like it was second nature. Riley didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She just gave the slightest shake of her head when I started forward. Stay back. She had it under control. Frank was yelling nonsense about suspicious behavior and citizens' arrests, his voice cracking under the weight of authority he'd invented in his own head. Neighbors peeked out from behind hedges. A few even laughed, thinking it was some sort of bizarre HOA-themed skit. Then Frank racked the slide. The laughter stopped. Phones came out. Riley stood like a stone, speaking in a tone so measured it could have put out a fire. She asked if he really wanted to escalate this. Frank, drunk on his power fantasy, screamed for her to get on the ground. Riley moved slowly, deliberately, reaching into her pocket as Frank's finger twitched on the trigger. Every muscle in me screamed to run, to do something, but I knew better. I'd seen Riley train SWAT teams and de-escalate hostages without breaking a sweat. Frank wasn't a threat. He was a mistake waiting to be arrested. From her hoodie pocket, Riley pulled a slim black wallet and flipped it open with 2 fingers. Her badge glinted in the sun. You could hear the collective gasp from the onlookers as the words Federal Bureau of Investigation hit them like a hammer. Frank looked like he'd swallowed a brick. Riley's voice was ice. She listed his crimes: clearly aggravated assault on a federal officer, brandishing a firearm, impersonating authority. And then she asked, cool as could be, if he had anything to say for himself before she called it in. He stuttered, eyes darting around like a cornered animal, trying to find a neighbor to back him up. But all those phones were still filming. Nobody was stepping in. Riley tapped her mic. Dispatch, this is Agent Riley Brenner, badge number 55121. I have an armed suspect threatening a federal officer. Requesting immediate backup. Frank's knees gave out. The gun clattered to the sidewalk. He dropped, hands up, blubbering that he didn't know, that it was a misunderstanding. Sirens wailed in the distance, closing fast. I finally walked over to Riley. She didn't even look at Frank, just watched him like a hawk watches a dying snake. And then came Carol. Carol Whitmore, HOA president and full-time tyrant, marched onto the scene with her signature clipboard and firestorm scowl. She pointed a trembling finger at Riley and accused her of trespassing. Claimed the HOA had jurisdiction over everything from sidewalks to oxygen. Riley barely tilted her head. Then, raising her badge again, she informed Carol that interfering with a federal investigation was a felony. Carol's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then, predictably, she tried to pivot, accusing Riley of impersonating law enforcement. Riley let her dig. She didn't even interrupt. Just waited for Carol to run out of breath before calmly asking if she'd be willing to turn over HOA financial records. Carol stumbled over her words, muttering something about the board needing to approve it. She turned and fled like a cockroach under kitchen lights. The squad cars arrived. Frank was cuffed and read his rights, still crying about how he thought he was protecting the neighborhood. Nobody bought it. One officer took his weapon, another took his statements. Meanwhile, Carol shoved her clipboard in a sergeant's face, babbling about HOA rights. The officer, who clearly had no time for suburban melodrama, warned her she'd be arrested too if she kept pushing. By sundown, news vans were circling the cul-de-sac. Reporters interviewed neighbors. The story was out. The HOA's fake authority had collapsed in the span of a single morning. And Riley? She sat at the kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee, unbothered, like she'd just returned from the grocery store instead of neutralizing an armed lunatic. The emergency meeting the next day was a circus. Riley and I sat in the back while Carol tried to salvage her dignity with a speech full of buzzwords and blame deflection. Then Riley stood and introduced herself. No theatrics, no accusations, just facts. She calmly confirmed that illegal weapons had been seized, funds had been misused, and a federal investigation was underway. The room went silent, then erupted. People demanded Carol's resignation. One board member quit on the spot. Within a week, Carol was gone. Officially, it was a leave of absence. In reality, she couldn't show her face without being heckled. Doug, sorry, Frank was facing multiple charges and probably jail time. And the HOA was under a full audit. The neighborhood changed overnight. Gone were the threats, the fines, the weaponized lawn disputes. People started talking again. Kids played without being barked at by fake patrols. A rotating group of volunteers replaced the security team, and they spent more time organizing potlucks than power trips. Riley didn't stick around. She had other missions to get back to. But before she left, the neighbors threw a casual thank you send-off. People brought pies, signed a poster, even joked about hiring her full-time. She just smiled and said the community didn't need her anymore, that they'd remembered how to stand up for themselves. And they had. The petty dictators were gone, replaced by people who gave a damn. Not about control, but about each other. Riley had stopped a disaster before it turned deadly. She hadn't fired a shot, hadn't raised her voice. She didn't have to. She just stood there and said, enough.